What is up, everybody? It's Dr. Vibe here, host and producer of the award-winning The Dr. Vibe Show. I have hosted and produced over 2,000 epic conversations over the last 10 years. And what makes our conversations epic? We don't do interviews. We do conversations. What is up, everybody? It's Dr. Vibe here, host and producer of the award-winning Dr. Vibe Show. As always, I like to say you're blessed, highly favored, a magnet for miracles, and a solution for someone's problem. Also know I'm a certified empowerment coach, president and CEO of Express Your Vibe coaching services. Communications. We've been having some fun over the last few minutes, so that's why I slipped up for a little bit, but we're all good. And do know that this is the home of Epic Conversations, and I'm the host of Epic Conversations. And I am jacked tonight. Really jacked, because I have two outstanding individuals on. I'm going to be sharing about a very important subject tonight. But let me introduce, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on bios because they've done so much they could host a thing on their own, but they've both been here before. But first things first, Janice Robinson-Celeste is a businesswoman, journalist, author, entrepreneur, mother, grandmother, and is one of the original founders of successful Black Parenting magazine. She's also a contributing writer for the Huffington Post, a published author of 2 parenting books, Pride and Joy by Simon & Schuster, and Making a Supermodel, A Parent's Guide. And you can see, by the way she looks, not being sexist, that she knows how to make them. So she also, at the age of 49, she held the title of Mrs. New Jersey, United States, 2015, and still competes in pageants today. She is the mother of 3 successful adult daughters, including international supermodel Cecily Lopez. And interesting enough, Janice, I have a niece who's a model, and I saw her the other day, and I mentioned your daughter's name. She goes, "Oh, really? Dad, you know about her?" So she's known. It's all good. Also, another friend, longtime friend of the Dr. Vibe Show, home of Epic Conversation, Dr. Marvin Thompson is an educational leader who has spent the majority of his 25 years in the educational field, turning around schools and challenge communities. The scope of his experiences in schools range from preschool director, elementary teacher, to district superintendent. And I know Dr. Thompson doesn't like reading a lot about him, but I will say that as chief academic officer of a charter school in New Orleans, he was featured in Oprah Winfrey's Blackboard Wars, which we got to get a hold of one day if Oprah would let it go, a national televised documentary bringing to the light the challenges facing urban schools in America. I'm hosting a conversation night about Black students and public school testing. Now, the background on this is the first time that Janice was on the Dr. Vibe Show. She mentioned about testing, and she said, "Don't get me started about testing." I remember that to this day. I said, okay, we're going to have to get Janice to let loose on this. So I thought to have both of you on in regards to this would be a great conversation. And both of you have evaluated experiences. Both of you have been part of the education system. Both of you have children. So this is going to be great. So Janice, I want you to start off. What gets you so upset about testing in Black children?
Well, there's a lot.
Okay, and she's got notes.
Start with one thing. Go ahead. What did you say? I'm sorry.
You've got notes, so I know you're ready for tonight.
Oh, I have lots of notes, but part of it is personal too, because first of all, I'm just not a good test taker, and on top of that, I get anxiety because of it. So there's a lot going on there, and that's not just it. And so I'm just not for standardized testing, because whose standards are we going by anyway? That's another issue. When I was an early childhood specialist, even down to screenings, which aren't really supposed to be a standardized test in that sense, but just a screening for young children, there were just some simple questions that children would answer differently that I would have to mark and correct, such as a picture of a fence, right? And I would ask them, "What is that?" And they'd say, "A gate," because that's what they called it in the neighborhood, a gate. But I would have to mark it wrong because we didn't have picket fences in the ghetto. So how do I mark that wrong, knowing that I know exactly what they mean, but according to the directions and the way I was trained, I had to mark that incorrect, which then made them have a lower score on their, it was the Hawaiian Early Learning Profile. Oh, sorry, that was that one because I had also the Denver screening. But I would have to mark that assessment lower score for this child because what they knew of as a gate that functioned just like a fence, even though it was, the door of the picket fence, it was a gate to them. So, that's just a couple examples. And, now they're basing letter grades of schools on these tests. They're basing whether the schools get more funding based on these tests. We have what they're calling the Black Achievement Gap. I have issues with that because there's a lot of reasons that achievement gap is there, which we could talk about tonight as well. So those are a few. Is that a good start?
More than good enough start. Dr. Thompson, give some background when it comes to educational testing and then educational testing of children of color.
Well, I think that whole testing scenario kind of follows the whole history of blacks in education in America. So we've always been isolated from the mainstream. When you look, Brown versus the Board of Education was bigger than just integration, because what it did was really exemplify how America viewed blacks as their, how do I say this, as giving them their fair share of opportunity. So we were already separate but equal. So prior to the testing that we have now, there's two types. Let me clarify this first of all. There's norm reference testing, and then there's criterion reference. The three of us, probably many of our listeners, if you're over 40, you were probably used to norm reference test. So norm reference tests measure you against the entire population. So they're very general tests. Standard achievement test is the best example. The Iowa test of basic skills is another one. Both of those are norm reference, and it'll tell you where you perform in a percentage, a quartile, the top 25%, 50 percentile, whatever. Well, now we're in criterion reference testing. Prior to criterion reference testing, most of the literature was saying that blacks were closing the achievement gap. I mean, the last document I read in preparation for our discussion today was in 1998, 2 years before No Child Left Behind and the infusion of criterion reference testing. And in 1998, they were saying that the achievement gap, we're making headway, but at the same time, there were other variables that were also moving forward. The unemployment rate for blacks was also declining in the 70s, in the 80s, right? Still coming out of that 60s movement. So there are all the variables that Janice alluded to are always components. What was significant about 2001 and No Child Left Behind? Criterion reference tests literally were state-driven tests. And Janice alluded to the cultural bias in test design. That's always been a component of the question of testing. And as much as the testers like to say that they're accounting for it, there's only so much accounting you're going to do when you're still making the test for another group of people who don't share those experiences. Mm-hmm. So that's the macro picture of assessments. And when you look at criterion reference testing, it's very state specific, much more curriculum driven, which requires much more onus on the teacher to deliver accurate information to students to be able to succeed on those tests. And when you have cultural gaps, when you have poverty, high unemployment rate, and you put those in the classroom and have those same expectations without changing your methodology, that's where schools fall down. That's been my experience with schools. Turning around schools to improve their testing outcomes wasn't about teaching them how to get kids to take tests. It was about teaching them how to deliver the curriculum in a way that students can make connections with the curriculum. That's the biggest gap.
Janice, you can either add on to that or I can go on deeper into another conversation piece. What's best for you?
Well, I just want to make a comment.
Sure.
Because teachers are still teaching the test. I see it going on to this day, even though it's criteria based. They are still, we had a whole, there was a whole big deal in Atlanta not too many years ago where people were cheating and teaching the test and finding out what's on the test so they can teach it. That's a lot of times the teachers don't get to make these tests. They're made by someone at school district, so they're not privy to what type of questions are there. You just have to teach the standards, and then the kids should make those connections and pass the test. But a lot of these teachers are actually trying to figure out what's on there because their raises are tied to this as well. So does that mean the children are learning it? They might retain it just for the test, but are they really truly learning it is another issue. So I just wanted to add on to that because he mentioned that, and it's really important to know that, teachers are also stressed out about it. They are really stressed out about it because they're barely making a living wage in some of these states. And for their, raises, their way of living to be tied to this, it's going to be stressful for them too. So now you're putting teachers under stress. They have to deal with our kids. You just never know which way that's going to go. And as we saw in Atlanta a few years back, that went really, really bad for them. It really did not work out. We had teachers, we had people arrested in the district for cheating. All kinds of stuff happened. And these schools want to be an A school. So they have this now letter grade. Everyone's trying to, we got to be A school. We got to be A school. What are they giving up in their value system to do that? A lot of schools are kind of taking shortcuts and doing things they're not supposed to do, and I know that for a fact.
Well, so Janice, it's very interesting, Janice and Dr. T, we're talking about this because over the last few weeks, I'm in here in Toronto in Canada, but I'm hearing about how many teacher strikes are going on in different states.
Absolutely. And I'm all for it. I'm for it because we always say put children first, and we should. We absolutely should. But I'm very much for these. No, I know that children cannot thrive until the teachers are thriving. It's like being a mom trying to take care of your kid when you're sick. You can't, as a mom, if you don't take care of you surely aren't there to take care of your kids. Guess what? Teachers are pretty much moms for the most part of all of these children. If you care about your students, you're like second mom. And some of these kids come up to you and call you mom. They call me mom. Hey, mom, because sometimes moms aren't there. And sometimes they are. But, you got a lot of kids got moms that got work 2-3 jobs or whatever. They hardly ever see their moms, or they might be separated from their moms. God knows what these kids go through. Some of these kids go through so much that you couldn't even write a movie script because you can't fathom it. So, I'm all for teachers doing what they need to do to fight for a living wage. Some of the states like Oklahoma, and they don't have, the wages are actually pretty pathetic when you look at their paychecks. And I don't know how you can be head of household and raise a family on the income that they're bringing in. And a lot of that, I think, goes back in history when we had the school marm who barely got a stipend to teach and had a lot of rules she had to follow, and she was fed by the families. And and then of course we started getting men into the system later on, many decades later, and of course the pay raises got a little bit better, got somewhat advanced. But today, you're barely making a living where you can't even go back to school. You can't afford to go and get a terminal degree because you don't make enough, and you surely don't want to go in debt to do so. So something has to be done when the educator can't go back to school to get their education because they can't afford to do so.
Thank you for sharing. Dr. T, I saw a lot of nodding of your head over the last few moments. I know there's some things you want to share, so please feel free to add on to what Janice has just shared with us.
Well, I think Janice just kind of summed it up. When you take a look at what we've asked of teachers, I love the history, Janice, that you gave, because you're 100% right. This is, and I do not mean this in a derogatory way, but this is a mommy industry. And in the history of education has followed the way we treat women in the workplace. And these teacher strikes are symptomatic of a system that really is undoing itself right now. We're decentralizing education. When you take a look at the Department of Education, Betsy DeVos, it's being decentralized. It's moving into privatization.
Now, hold on a second. I just saw Janice's eyes roll when you mentioned Betsy DeVos's name.
I was going to try to get through.
No comments.
It's the elephant in the room, and it needs to be shot. It just needs to be put down. But this elephant is dismantling public education. And when it's not just the federal government that's being dismantled, it's the response by locales to the dismantlement. So there's less assurity of stability in education right now. And let me just be real specific. The Office of Civil Rights Department within the Department of Education, within the first 6 months, that staff was cut in half. So the protections of our young people, particularly young people of color, are almost ignored. And in this Department of Education, even went so far as to said, we will, with our new staffing levels, prioritize which cases we will pursue. So that gives no certainty to those young people who rely on that. You can extend that to students of special needs. So when you start doing those things and start labeling the landscape in a whole new way, that sends a message to the educators in the building. And I'm just speaking to, as Janice's points about the strike, it's not, now the pay becomes really significant because now they're looking at all of the demands. The pay hasn't changed, but the demands are greater. So the accountability hasn't gone away. The stakes have actually been raised, but they have fewer resources to do it, less support to do it, and support in education has been a lack of quality professional training. And people can say, oh, I went to a training. You guys hear the police shooting? I equated to police shootings. What do the sheriffs and police response? Oh, they're always the same thing. Well, we provided the training to them. Look, I can go to a training and still not learn anything. Me attending does not guarantee that I gained anything from it. The same thing applies in the classroom. So a lot of our teachers, they get their recertification points. They continue to keep their licenses by attending trainings. So those trainings don't necessarily translate into better practices. It translates into security to keep doing what you're doing. Until we do something different with that and put new measures and put weight in a different place, the training and the accountability for using what you get in training won't change. So these are all pieces of this big pie of demanding more money. Teachers are considered professionals, but when you look at the same professionals who serve our communities in the same fashion, like our policemen, like our firemen, like our nurses, their rate of pay is dependent solely on tax basis. Understand that. Only on tax rates. And as a superintendent, I remember the first time I ever did a budget, and I'm looking at $43 million. And then I realized that 91% of my budget is teachers. 91%. And I also learned at this time, once you go over 90% of your budget on staffing, you're in trouble because you can't provide services to kids. Well, it wasn't the pot that was the problem. It's what made up the pot. Where did that money come from that only gave me $43 million when my needs were much greater than that? Well, I had to look at poverty, how the money came in. When we start looking at standardized testing, Black student achievement, the one common denominator that we find is poverty. And when we started redlining, and which was a result of, you asked me about the history, when we were redlined into poor districts, denied the opportunity to own homes and gain equity in those homes to improve the values in our communities, we were stuck from that moment forward in this cycle of poverty and low achievement, high unemployment, and all that goes with it. So if you understand the big picture, it's not what's happening It's where we come from and understanding. And it's only up to us to understand it, because it's going to be our understanding that changes the system. It's not going to be the system. The system will never change for us on its own volition. And this is why shows like yours, Dr. Vibe, and the work you do, Jan, is so important, because it's going to be this generation of parents, activists, and young people who now have this new knowledge, who now approach the system with new demands, new understandings, and new expectations. But this cycle of poverty or low achievement in standardized testing is literally a reflection of economics that now the teachers are feeling. They're feeling that same, it doesn't matter until it starts hitting their pockets, right? Until it starts hitting their pockets, people are paying attention. But I want you to note, no one's talking about student achievement in the context of teacher pay.
Okay. Janice, Janice or Dr. T, I need some understanding. How are these tests devised? Who makes up these tests? I don't see them. Do you? Like, who are the people that make up these tests? And are these tests different for each state? I think they would be. But how are these? Who are these invisible people that devise these tests? Janice, can you help me out, or Dr. T?
There are many different types of tests, and the children are tested all year long. We have, first of all, you need to know when you're a teacher, or doctor, when you are working in the school or education field, you'll find out everything is an acronym, right? Am I right? Like, you need a dictionary for all of the acronyms. But in Florida, we have the ELAs, which are the English and literature types of tests that they have to take with reading and writing. And then you have, of course, the math, which is the equivalent of that. We have FLAs, we have CDFs, we have all kinds of things from the district, which is a common district final. But we have all types of tests that the students have to take. Now, where some of them come from the school district. Others are standardized tests that help to measure them, in different ways from different companies. But you can probably speak on where some of these standardized tests that measure their criteria, if they met them, can't come from. Because I know the ones here that we use a lot of come from the state, come from the district, but I'm sure they're getting them from some sort of tests and centers or wherever. But I can't address that as much.
Pearson is one of the biggest companies in New Jersey. Pearson's huge. And then there's, the New Jersey test makes ACT, SATs. Yes. But the people who make tests are called psychometricians. That's what they do.
What is that? Sounds like
it's kind of like if you make a survey, you have to put a survey out and say, this is what I want the survey to do. And then you have to evaluate in 3 domains. Does the question or series of questions actually give me what I'm after? So that's a really shortened version of what a psychometrician does. I happen to know a very, very good, it's not too many people who know a psychometrician, never thought I would, but I know a very, very good psychometrician. And throughout my career, he was my go-to person when I had testing questions. So that's kind of how I became familiar with it. But test design is a very tricky thing. And Dr. Vibe, you and I have discussed this before, and Janice, I know in your work you've encountered this. One of the biggest gaps, when we say poverty covers a huge array of things and behaviors, ideologies, and concepts within a group of people. So if we just look at the money, it's easy to dismiss it and move on and just say you're poor. But poor has a behavior. Poor has a way of thinking. Poor has a way of evaluating. Poor people evaluate. Poor people create. Poor people think. Poor people problem solve. They do everything that everyone else does, but their circumstance drive how they do it. And if we understand that, we can teach them. One of the first things I learned that was a barrier to Black students' achievement was vocabulary and context. The way the tests are designed, the vocabulary in those tests, let me give you an example. And I remember this distinctly because this was the moment of my awakening. And guys, I'm going to take you back 15, 16, but this actually happened as I'm reviewing results from a pre-test of my 5th graders and my 3rd graders in Virginia. I noticed, and we and my teachers noticed, there was a pattern in literature where they were all missing the same questions. And there was one word that was hanging them up, and the word was passage. So you and I, they were looking for the word paragraph. I want you to read this paragraph and determine it to me. Well, the writers of the test changed the word paragraph to the word passage. So all the kids, the answers were all over the place, but I would say 80 to 90% of the kids missed any question that had the word passage in it. Well, just as we discovered it, sure enough, when the real test was given that year, that was a statewide issue. As a matter of fact, it was such a statewide issue that the state, and I have to give them credit, and I know the state superintendent, she made a direct contact with the testing agency and said, we need this changed for next year, right? Or actually, it wasn't that it was changed. She actually sent a letter to all school districts in the state to start having their teachers incorporate that vocabulary in their lessons. Our young people are not exposed to a lot of the vocabulary that's used in these assessments. They're also not exposed to the context in which they're given. You know, their world is small, it's not nearly as broad, and the breadth of their world is gained through a television screen. Right? So those two don't marry in the test, and that's still open to interpretation. So when we start talking about the cultural dissonance and test design, you really can't account for it because the test makers are the majority, or at least at the present, they're the majority. So they're in control of that assessment. They're in control of the state of knowledge that they expect. But what's not being translated in schools is the very thing I started with. An awareness, first of all, an acceptance that poverty does not mean you do not think, create, problem solve, any of that. That, I find, is a huge unspoken bias in the way we deliver the curriculum to our children to allow them to compete. The second thing that I find is a barrier, aside from vocabulary, is stamina. Our young people, and to get to vocabulary, you have to work them through stamina. Our kids will give up on tests. When you start throwing out vocabulary that they don't know, they're not familiar with. Anybody in their right mind is going to preserve their self-esteem and their ego, and they're going to throw in the towel and go, I'm done. I'm done. Mm-hmm. You have to build their stamina. And it's not stamina in test taking, it's their stamina in vocabulary acquisition. It's stamina in breaking down, developing context of those skills so that they can problem solve, evaluate, and see cause and effect in the tests that they take. Our kids think just like every other kid on this planet, but there's some inherent bias in how we deliver that curriculum to them that limits their opportunities to be successful.
Wow.
Right. Now, you talked about red lines a little bit, but a lot of students today cross lines to go to school. Mm-hmm. And I was one of those students way back when. You're talking about going back. Let's go back even further. So in high school, because I was raised in the ghettos of West Philadelphia, and I was pretty smart in school. My parents always told me I was great. I was smart. I achieved. But when I got to high school with the white girls who were taking like the PSATs and SATs, and we were practicing, and I'm looking at them like, why do they know these words that I had never heard of before? How do they know how to do this? And I don't know how to do this. And I felt less than. And I couldn't understand. And you're right, you want to preserve some of your self-esteem. And I give up in a minute. I don't understand. Yeah. And then, but as an adult, I realized their experiences that helped them grow their vocabulary were way different than mine. And we know if you take children out of their environment, that helps with the vocabulary. Their vocabulary grows. These girls are going on ski trips and Europe, and things I never even knew about unless I saw it on television. So, but their vocabulary grew from all of those experiences with their parents. And my parents gave me books and things like that, but they knew way more than I did. And I was totally intimidated. I really was. And I see it today with my students because they are in the classroom, coming from a poor area, but into an area that is, middle income, if there is such a thing anymore. But they get there and they don't know these words. They don't understand. They don't get out of their neighborhood too often unless they're, coming to school or to go to a store in that area. But they don't know these things. And they're being taught the same things in the school, but they don't have the same experiences. And experiences are important. It's important that they know that they can do this through everything from cultural pride. We ignore that in schools unless it's Black History Month. And we know from research, I have research right here, that it says new study finds that positive feelings about Blackness improves academic performances for Black girls.
Yeah.
So, I'm sure it works with boys too. But these are the kind of things that we tend to ignore in school. And then when some teachers teach it, as we know from some of the news reports that have come out during Black History Month, they don't know how to teach about Black culture and Black experiences and Black history. They do it all wrong, where it's an insult or it's just outright not correct. So
go ahead.
Go ahead. But that's, it really it does have to do with testing in a way, because you expect them to be able to achieve these scores, but they're not getting those experiences all around. We're in a white household. They got those experiences from traveling or wherever they're going. They see themselves on everything. They're dominant everywhere. And we just got that feeling a little bit when Black Panther came out, right? We were like, this is how white people feel. Wow, this is great.
Every day, right?
Movie. Yeah, but we got that one, month. And just like Black History Month. And then the bad thing about Black History Month with the teachers, a lot of times too, they will take the same people and teach them who? Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King. Nothing wrong with them. This is all we hear about. Maybe if we're lucky, we'll hear a little bit about Malcolm X. You know what I mean?
Well, so you're lucky if you heard that. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Some people are like, oh, Malcolm X, no. But yes, so we really need, talking about in-services, Black History Month should be a time when we give teachers in-service to teach about the culture that is part of their school. If it's Haitian Americans, Jamaican Americans, if it's Puerto Ricans, whatever it is, anybody that's brown, you need to know about their culture. Or anyone, Asian as well. You need to know about their culture. And it's good for the students to know that too. I heard a student today ask a girl, where are you from? You're Chinese? No, she's Korean. And then, where is that? He should know. You're temporary where Korea is, So we still have a lot of work to do. We really do.
So Dr. T, I want to jump in here. You have had a lot of experience on the administration end. Why does this still exist at the administration? Because from where I'm sitting, and correct me, either one of you if I'm wrong, these tests are not setting up students of color for success. And it's existed for years and years and years. What is the elephant in the room? What is the stopgap? Why, we all see it. Why ain't they seen it and want to do anything about it?
Oh, I'm laughing. Because if I told you how easy this fix is, you would think I'm crazy, but I wouldn't tell you if I hadn't done it so many times. First of all, I'm going to try to give a short piece. We, as educators, don't work at the level of professionalism that the public thinks we do. We work with an archaic system that keeps perpetuating itself generation after generation. Let me give you an example. Testing. That's what we're talking about today. When people say, my kid's not doing well in math, he failed the state test on math. Well, why? The state test in every state is made up of 5 components. So he may have done well in 3 of those components and is only deficient in 2. But a teacher has a way of knowing that. And it's kind of like going into a doctor's office and the doctor says, before I operate on you, let me run some tests to see, your blood level, your sugar level, and all these other things. You go in and say you don't feel well, there's no pill for feeling better. There's a specific thing that needs to be done. And when schools take the approach to fix math in those 5 areas and make sure minimally that every kid is performing at 80% along the way, they're going to be fine. But here's what we do. I have to, and this goes back to your point, Janice, about teacher stress and testing. I'm not saying that teachers intentionally go, I don't care. The way the testing was brought in, fomented, promulgated this type of stress. You're going to get 100% pass rates. Folks, only 2 things that are 100% certain in this life is you're paying taxes and you're going to die. When you buy a car, no matter how much you pay for it, that car dealer does not assure you that we'll never have problems. That's why you have a warranty. So to come out and say you're going to have 100% pass rates, I already knew that was malarkey. You must be kidding me. So why do we still have this problem? 1, we do not dig deep enough into our professional responsibilities to know, understand, execute, and refine those things that produce success for every kid. That's number 1. Number 2, we live in a nation that now has a majority minority student population in America and will continue to grow for the next 80 years in that same fashion. At the same time, we have a 78 to 80% white majority teaching corps with less than 10%, actually less than 6% of the teaching corps in the United States being black and less than 15% being Latino. So you have, and I've spoken to researchers directly on this topic, you have implicit and explicit bias inherent in education. The research is very clear, starts in preschool and then doesn't stop throughout your entire educational cycle. We cannot expect the system itself to say, okay, we'll stop. In some instances, they're not even aware that they're doing it. Those who are on the receiving end of this bias, whether implicit or explicit, have to have one common understanding of it, prioritize it, those things that negatively and directly impact how we learn and what we're not doing. And thirdly, with that knowledge, demand to see the behaviors that produce the outcomes we want. So, for example, the example I just gave you about the 5 domains that exist in math, every math test has the same components. The content may be different in terms of the questions themselves, but math is the most universal concept that we all teach around the world. 5 domains, geometry and probability, all of those things, number and number sense, they're all in there. So schools don't say we failed in math. Good schools say we didn't do as well as we like to do in math. Here's where we did well. Here's the culture of how we teach our kids. So let me tell you something. When you break down test data is not and never, ever, ever.
Okay,
was
Dr. just excuse me, Janice, just be very careful when you're rustling around because it's affecting the audio.
You can hear all that?
No problem.
Never designed to measure students. Testing was designed to inform teaching, to inform it in exactly the same manner I just presented. Let me give you another example. In every one of those categories, every one of the descriptions has a descriptive word about how the teacher is going to deliver. And this is where we start seeing poor teaching, especially in high poverty schools, because we usually have our youngest least experienced and least effective teachers as a whole. I'm not saying everybody who works in those communities are that way, because I spent my entire career in those communities. But when we start talking about budgets and teacher salary and teacher pay and morale, those are the teachers who are put in the least desirable situations. When those teachers give tests, every teacher, the curriculum gives one word, the first beginning word of every description: describe, analyze, interpret, right? Describe this, analyze this, determine the cause and effect of this. If the teacher takes something that says analyze and then presents it as description, when kids take the test, what are they looking for? Description. To analyze anything. So that's called the alignment. There's three pieces of testing: what's written, what's taught, and what's tested. Only two of those pieces never move. The written never moves, the test never moves. The most powerful medium in between that is the teacher. So one of the ways that I've always teachers to analyze whether I'm not measuring your intentions, I'm measuring your actions. Let's take a look at the curriculum where you're doing poorly. What does that say that you're supposed to do? Now compare to what you actually did. And I can't tell you how many times teachers go, oh crap, I see what you mean. Yeah, that's why 80% of your kids miss that question. So that's the layer of professionalism, and that's the layer of knowledge that our parents need to understand. They need to start asking. Yeah, we as a Black community need to start asking schools, how do you analyze that test data that you get? How are we doing in these reporting categories? Those are the subsets in every subject. How are we doing? Because remember, testing was never, ever, ever designed to measure children. It was to inform teaching. And here's what's happened. When it comes to Black students, when that achievement gap and that accountability rose, understand the achievement gap ever since we implemented No Child Left Behind and this high level of testing, that achievement gap that they said was closing back in the 80s and 90s is doing nothing but widening every single year. Okay. It has done nothing but widen. And until the voices of those being affected are informed voices, straightforward voices that are asking poignant questions about the professional behavior of a school system and or a school, they can tell you anything. But you can hold them accountable to things you know that they're supposed to be doing or should be doing. And I will say this. I've gone into so many schools that are like this, that are failing, about to be taken over. Everybody's stressed. And you teach them to sit down and analyze what they're doing. And I can't tell you how the stress leaves the room. It's like, oh my, are you kidding? I'm like, yeah, all y'all got to do is that. They've been talking about the wrong things. The culture, and Janice did a great job going back to the school marm, because frankly, the only thing that's happened from where Janice started talking to where we are today is education just kept piling stuff on and piling stuff on and piling stuff on and passing it on to the next generation, and they all receive it. And the world doesn't work that way. And for our kids, close that achievement gap, these teachers and schools must use very specific strategies. And they talk a lot about culture. They love to blame discipline as the reason. And I can say this, and every good teacher, every good principal, every good superintendent will tell you that. The best deterrent to discipline in the school is better teaching. If I'm paying attention, I'm not fighting. I'm worried about getting whatever I'm getting. I'm happy that I'm being successful in schools. In my career, those kids who get in trouble the most have the lowest self-esteem about their educational opportunities and or abilities, or don't feel the school is giving them what they need or creating an environment that's inviting for them. So I might as well act out. They look for reasons to exclude themselves by not allowing you to exclude me. And that's why we have behavior problems in a lot of our schools.
Janice, I know you've
I'm
got
going to add on to that.
Go ahead.
What I find a lot of times, it's not just those kids. I find some kids that actually would do well outside of like high school, for instance. They have charisma. They have potential. They have the type of personality that doesn't deal with authority, but not because of them, because authority can't handle the fact that they're wanderers, or they have a bathroom pass. Those are the kids that are going to go see their favorite teacher, but they're not supposed to be there. Or they are, but they can have the biggest smile. They'll talk to people. People like them, but there are certain people that won't, because they don't understand that this kid has the potential to be great because of this personality. If he was in the high school, he could be a salesman. He could talk to anyone. He could sell, you sand at the beach. This is that kid. I got a handful of them that I identify. And honestly, the majority, I think all of them are black. All of them are black boys. Black boys. Well, I have one that's a black girl that actually has that kind of personality too, now I think about it. So, but they are the ones that get the most referrals. They're the ones that always are getting in-school suspension now because, we had that protection in place by Obama, but that's about to go. Thus the rolling eyes earlier for Betsy DeVos. That's one of them anyway. Yeah. So, I've identified these kids. So now I've identified them, but I have no power, as a teacher. I don't. So when, only thing I can do is do my best to make sure they follow the rules and explain to them why they need to do that so that they don't get in trouble and they don't end up in ICE, and that, talk to them and say, and I tell them, you have potential, because not too many people are telling these kids that they're great, by the way. They're not getting it at home a lot of times. You have parents that do that, but a lot of these kids are not getting that. You would be surprised as a teacher when I tell a student, you are really smart, or you're really good at this, how they just light up, or that you have potential. If you weren't in school right now, you got to stay in school, but if you weren't in school when you graduate, you're going to do really well. You should think about business. No one really talks to these kids like that a lot of times. They have no idea. And I'm thinking of one kid in particular, he was really good at editing video, because I teach TV production. So he was editing, and he has some special needs, but he's excellent at it. And just to tell him, do you know you really are good at this? One day you could be a great producer. I love your stuff that you're doing. You really think so? I know so. And the smile that just came across this kid's face, I said, what, does no one ever tell you how great you are? You are great. No. And it just smiled. And guess where these kids end up? So unfortunately, though, when you're that type of teacher, all the kids tend to gravitate to your room and during lunch break. Can I sit in here during lunch? No, I need my minute. You're like, I need my break. Can I sit in here? Can I come and edit? No. I need a minute. But I've identified the kids that have great potential, and I have a couple. I can even say that I have a few that are white kids that I know that have potential as well, that are very charismatic. But they get in trouble. And as a teacher, I try to give these kids a lot more breaks, because I know they're not bad kids. They're not, and they don't deserve to enter that pipeline or to keep being pushed into that pipeline, because they have this personality that just doesn't fit authority and rules. And as we know, and yes, we do need to follow rules, but as we know in business, a lot of people break those rules to get up where they are. And I'm not saying it's right, but we see it. If we see it on a daily basis, what do we expect from kids? Really? We see it in front of us on television. We hear about it. It's on social media. What are we going to expect from kids? So if it's not hurting anyone right now, I'm like, okay. I know you were supposed to be in the bathroom, but you were talking to so-and-so because you guys got to go everywhere. But I understand. Just come sit down and don't do it again. Or you sign out, or whatever it is that I have people do. So, yeah. So not every kid is just acting out for those types of reasons that you mentioned. Some of them really have potential, and if they were in the business right now, they would do really well, but they're not going to do well in high school. They can't still, they're charmers. They want to go charm people. They want to go see their favorite teachers. They want to do this, and they're just out of area. And if the security finds them, they're going to get in trouble. If, God forbid, the SRO or somebody like that finds them,
Yeah.
it just goes downhill from there.
I just want to interrupt. We have a number of people watching. We also have a number of questions for both of you. So I'm going to take a few moments in regards to, and actually one gentleman has asked basically 3 different questions. So we're going to get you guys into some busy mode here. I believe it's Alchem Art. And I think it was feeding on something that you had mentioned, Dr. Thompson, saying he's asking, or they are asking, if testing is for the teacher. Whoa! He just put in something else, so I had to look at something else here. Going, if testing is for the teacher, will students just rely on the teacher feedback to track their own improvement?
Yes. Yes and no. It's a good question. So let me just follow that cycle. Testing was designed to inform teaching. Remember I said there's 3 parts of testing. And it's called curriculum alignment. I want everybody to remember that, because when you read about it in the paper, or you hear a teacher or a superintendent or a school board member say it, this is what they're talking about. 3 parts to testing. What's written, that's the curriculum. Teaching what's written, and then testing what's written. That cycle goes on in every classroom all week long. Teacher teaches, kids do, and then they're tested, right? So the test at the state level that they take is designed, and just like during the week, teacher gives a test, 80% of my kids fail it. A good teacher should say, that's not on the kids, that's on me. Absolutely. Which questions did they get wrong? That's called reteaching. Well, that same strategy and ideology expands to the statewide test. When they get their results back, how did my kid do in this school, or on this test in math and English and reading? And they look at the different parts of that subject. Remember what I said, math has 5 parts, reading has 4, history has 4, and they can look at those subsets and then evaluate how they did in preparing them. Now if you have, and Janice mentioned Atlanta, and I got a story to tell you about that one, because I met with that superintendent and that school district 4 years before they got arrested, offering my help. Actually, they called me and I sat in a meeting and they laughed at my strategies. Well, they're all in jail and fired. So, end of that discussion. But in any case, and I just said, I told you so. But when you see a failing school, this has more to do with the response of that school to those test results. So what began to happen after schools began to fail over the years, when, keep in mind what I told you about the makeup of our schools. We're now minority majority schools. The pressure under No Child Left Behind was on schools to raise achievement for minority students. But because we have this inherent explicit and explicit racial bias, unconscious and subconscious, in our schools, it was easy for schools to turn it around from them and put it back to kids. Why was it so easy? Because aside from the federal government saying you're going to get 100% of these kids to pass, one, there had never been any strategies ever in the history of schools for teachers to utilize test data to make them better teachers. That had never been done systemically. So what had never been done systemically could never be accounted for. So the teachers could ignore it. They now blame the outcome on the kids and the families and the communities and not have enough resources. So to answer his question about what the students expect, the same thing they would expect during the course of the year from any teacher who gives them a quiz or a test. I required of any teacher who gave a quiz or a test in my room, if less than 80% of your kids passed, you need to go back and look at what you did. So I had a threshold, and there was a board. I mean, we had it throughout the school. Anything less than 80%, that you need to check you before you go check the kids, right? And we don't have that. Teachers give tests. Y'all fail, they'll put the grade in, they give zeros. We know zeros is never for kids, zeros are for teachers. That's about ego, has nothing to do with the kids. Every teacher can argue with me, oh, that's about work ethic. Okay, whatever. Try not paying me one day when I showed up for work. We got a problem. So you're not teaching them anything. Doesn't work, and we know what research says about zeros. It's a demotivator. But a kid, a teacher who gives a test should inform herself, and if they have to, and this is reteaching, is a part of the lesson planning process of every teacher in America. And that reteaching stage is there because teachers are expected to review the results and make adjustments in their curriculum. It is no different from the state test. The problem is schools don't sit down as a large classroom as a student body or a school of professionals and acknowledge what they're good at and what they need work in. And I always find the same patterns in schools. So if I'm going to school A and they've been failing in math for 5 years, out of the 5 categories, they've been kicking butt in 3 of them and then failing in 2 for the last 15 years, and nobody's talking about that.
Anything you want to add to that, Janice, at all?
Well, I always said that, if you have a large majority of students not doing well on the test, and I'm talking the national test, the standardized test, and you blame the kids, that's not how it works. We all had that college professor who you got to class and he said, no one gets an A in my class. Well, that's a you problem, not a me problem. That's not a me problem. Something's wrong with you and your testing or your class or the way you're teaching if no one in your class is getting an A. Something's wrong. So it's the same thing with these tests, these standardized tests. If we're having a problem that the Black children aren't getting it, it's not the Black children, it's the test. So it's the same thing you're saying that's happening in the classroom. If the kids, majority of them are not getting a question or not getting the test, then you need to go back and reevaluate. When are we going to go back and reevaluate? When are we going to say enough's enough, that something's wrong, not with the kids, but with the way we're doing this, and come up with a better way?
Another question I have here, and I'll have Janice address it first, and then Dr. T can follow up. Same gentleman or same individual, Alchem Arts, saying, do you feel that Black male students are less competitive in the academic sense?
No, I think that's totally individualized. Like, you have some that are very competitive, and they pick and choose just like any other student what they want to be competitive with. I have some students now I'm just thinking about them as a group, as an example. They're very competitive in what they do. It's what they're interested in doing, just like any other teenager. So no, I don't think that's the case. They are going to have things that they're strong in and that they want to do. And I happen to teach television production, so they are very interested in that because it's a project-based learning. I think our students do really well with project-based learning, using your hands as well as thinking through problems. We have STEM in our classroom. So it's depending on each child. I don't think you can generalize that.
Dr. T?
I couldn't add much more to that. I think she's absolutely right. I think schools in general, we're just talking about boys, and I'll get to Black boys, but schools aren't built for boys. They're built for girls. Boys are tactile. To sit in a classroom, and girls are very verbal. Boys are very tactile. Boys like to control their environment. And this is why, early on in education, every teacher's taught to develop a lesson with 3 domains: for an auditory listener, for a tactile learner, and a visual learner. And I think a lot of times our schools, in the delivery of the curriculum, spend a lot of time in auditory and visual, and the tactile piece is missing. So, as Janice talked about project-based learning, that is a huge motivator for boys because they're up, they're moving, they're creating, they're developing. That's one. Number 2, and I think this pertains to Black boys, and actually boys in general. When you take a look at the end game for education today, the message it sends to kids is college or bust. We have watched since the mid-'80s to now, the vocational programs disappeared. They didn't dwindle, they just disappeared. You will find them in rural communities, and if you do find them in urban centers, they have very limited occupancy and space, so it's competitive in a free public education society. So it's not broad. And then you don't see, even in the private sector, pushing for this type of skilled labor. Every kid's not going to go to college. We know that. Every kid doesn't even want to go to college. And that also is a demotivator for a lot of young kids. And I'm in New Orleans. I've been in a high school with a lot of young men who go, Doc, I ain't trying to go to college, man. I mean, I want to be something, but I don't want to go to college. So what is there for them? And that's a big question. Janice gave, I think, probably one of the best examples of what some of our young black boys are missing and needing. And that's just acknowledgement, encouragement, and putting more value to their self-worth. I came up with a hashtag that I'm still trying to figure out how to drive it, but it literally is time to become. These boys want to become something, right? And I always tell kids, I told my own, do not go to school to learn. See, when you go to school to learn, you become engineered. But when you go to school to become, you decide what that is. Now you own your education. You control how you're perceived. You control what's projected to you, because you're trying to become something, and you're either going to determine very quickly if what you're encountering is there to help you become or there to stop you from becoming.
Can I use that? Can I use that hashtag? I need to use that hashtag. Am I allowed?
No.
Okay. Go ahead, Janice.
Well, I just need to say that I am a tactile, concrete learner, and I'm female. But and
that wasn't blanket, Janice.
I'm just saying, because I'm totally mechanically inclined. I don't like to sit still. I'm not that person. So, and we're trying to encourage more women to get in, or girls, I should say, to get into STEM. So. I think project-based learning is great for everyone, and then you can still, go back to like traditional classroom learning for some things. But if we can incorporate project-based learning into almost every subject, I think our students will be reignited about and excited about learning again, and not dread just sitting in the classroom, reading books. Because what I found with my students, especially when I have to substitute, because they'll use the textbook more when we have a sub than any time, because I try to keep everything exciting. I translate the text into slides if I have to, or demonstrations. But when we have a sub and I use the text, and I'll say, okay, well, answer the questions at the end of the chapter or whatever, because I'm trying to keep it easy for the substitute. They just do a treasure hunt through the chapter. They don't read it. They just treasure hunt for the answers. So they don't get anything from it. And then, but then they'll get really smart and work as a group sometimes and share the answers. So their answers will be alike, and they expect me not to catch them on that, Right. So it's like, okay, I see what you guys did here. No, you're not slick. You're not slick, but they work harder sometimes trying to get over on the teacher. But that's another story, right?
No problem. I'll come out, and I won't keep you guys much longer because I know we're running a little bit over time. They say young teen men need more male teachers. What do you recommend we do to bring more balance? This is really important because appropriate role models is not available often. Go ahead, Jan, you're ready.
That goes back to, as far as I'm concerned, to that paying the teachers, because you got heads of households that are women that can't make ends meet. And here we have the traditional head of household as the male, who's supposed to be the moneymaker in our minds. That's what we always came up with, right? But they can't do that as a teacher. So you're not going to attract them into the field from the industry where they can make a lot more money. I'm going to just put in perspective, even as a female, I took a $20,000 pay cut to be a teacher.
Wow.
$20,000 to be a teacher. All right. I shouldn't have to take a $20,000 pay cut to do that. So I went from the industry to being a teacher. How many men that have to raise a family And I mean, I was the head of household at that point, but how many men that have to raise a family are going to say, oh, I'm going to take a $20,000 pay cut when you have a wife and children or whatever? I'm talking traditional families. I wasn't a traditional family, but I was head of household. That's a lot. That's a lot to ask. So that's one of my answers, but I'll let you go ahead and answer that as well.
I agree. You don't pay them, they're not going to go.
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to go. In the research, when they start looking at, I mentioned earlier about how few minorities and men there are in the profession, the number one reason is pay. It's just that simple. Janice just said it. Pay them more.
Wow. Well, I can relate because back many years ago, I applied to get to teachers college twice. One time didn't get in, next time was on the waiting list. And back then I heard there's such a need for black male teachers. I'm still hearing the same thing today.
Yep. We make up less than 2% of the teaching corps.
Wow. Wow. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we're coming to the end of this epic conversation. We could go on for hours, but hey, we need to get some rest once in a while from our educational pursuits. So I just want to get some closing comments from both of you on basically what do blacks need to do to start knocking down, chipping away at this wall in regards to the inequities of testing. So Janice, you first.
Well, I think for me, it starts young. It says, I'm not even going past testing. I think it starts young to teach our children as soon as possible, because if they want to keep this testing around, they have to be able to compete. They have to be able to compete, and goes to the parents. Everything from giving your child those experiences, reading to them so that they can pass these tests. The schools do have to be accountable, though. They have to understand that there's a problem here, and it's not with the children. You need to go back and look at what's going on, and we need to figure out fixes for it, and not just say this is how it's always been, so this is how we're going to do it. Sometimes things are broken and we need to fix them, and take a serious look at it. It's just, I go back to that example where I said it, if I'm saying that, no one gets an A in here, something's wrong. And if no one's getting, not no one, but if the majority they're not getting high scores, and we have this achievement gap, something is wrong. Something's wrong, and we need to fix it.
Okay. Dr. T.
I agree with everything Janice just said, 100%. Systems serve themselves at some point. And over the last 50 years, we've been reforming education. We've been reforming the reforms that we reformed. So where are we? We're still in the same place. Reform means nothing but new strategy to do the same thing as it relates to the system. We, as parents, particularly black parents, have to stop looking at the system as if it's supposed to do something for us. It has proven that it is not. It is not. That doesn't mean you rail against it because you need it, but you need to use it to your advantage. Do not look at it as like it can deliver something to you. It will only give you what you ask for. Know more about what teachers are supposed to do. Learn more about what the curriculum is. Stop worrying about grades and worry about how he got that grade or she got that grade. That's way more important. And I tell parents all the time, that grade don't mean squat. Grades are for parents, not for kids. They don't do anything. And I can tell you that by looking at a test. In all those failing schools across America, how many kids do you think bring home report cards with A's, B's, and C's on it and still failed the test? So that report card is supposed to be telling you, I think they're on their way. Well, they're not. The grade in the report card isn't invalid. It's how they got their grade that's not valid. Give a kid a grade for participation. I gave you a grade for showing up. I give you bonus points I don't get bonus points for going to my job. So there's a lot of ways that our families can take more control of their school communities, not by going in and screaming, by sitting there with great certainty, great confidence, and Janice used the word accountability. 100% right. Schools have been avoiding that at the level that they need to. There have been discussions about it, but it hasn't proven to be such. The only people who are going to hold schools accountable are parents. And parents, especially black parents, don't rely on the old tools and discussions. You got to go deeper than that. You got to go as deep as the professionals who are supposed to be taking care of your children.
Strong words to end off another epic conversation. Janice and Dr. T, thank you so much for taking time out of your positive, productive schedule. Janice, if people want to find out more about successful Black parenting, what can they do?
You can go to successfulblackparenting.com and you can check out our website. If you're listening in the UK, you can go to successfulblackparenting.uk.
Excellent. Dr. T?
I'm under a rock, man. I'm going. I'm out. Now, you can find me on Twitter, Dr. T, at Dr. T Educates. On Facebook, Dr. T Educates. And it's real easy. My website, drteducates.com.
Wonderful. I am Dr. Vibe, host and producer of the award-winning Dr. Vibe show. My website address, drvibeshow.com. If you want to listen to audio replays of my epic conversations, you can go there. You can go to Stitcher Radio, TuneIn Radio, Google Play Music, iHeartRadio, and Apple Podcasts. Selected audio replays are at thegoodmenproject.com and WJMS Radio out of Chicago. If you want to catch replays of great conversations, video ones like this, go to YouTube, put in the space, DR_VIBE space SHOW. I am also a certified empowerment coach, president, CEO of Express Your Vibe Coaching and Communications. If you'd like a complimentary session, please touch base with me via Twitter at DRVIBESHOW. Email dr.vibe at the drvibeshow.com. You can also go to my website, go to the top of the website, click on Contact Dr. Vibe, and you can contact me there via email, audio, or video message. Check me out as a brand ambassador for Cuisine Noir magazine, which is the only online magazine dedicated to African Americans in food, wine, and travel. The website address is cuisinenoirmag.com. If you are a business or an entrepreneur that would need media promotion, I have a service called gettingmediacoverage.com. Touch base with me because I help businesses and entrepreneurs elevate their business, product, or service. And finally, every Monday morning, 7:25 a.m., out of Philadelphia, I'm on WURD, which is AM FM, AM 96.1, AM 900 AM. It is Pennsylvania's largest Black-owned station. I am on every Friday morning, 7:25 a.m., part of a panel of The Week That Was, where we cover stories that got publicity and stories that did not get the pub. I'm there with Ike Raw and Christopher Flood, the drummer, Norris. So, finally, 3 last things. Live your life as a dream. If you can dream it, you can make it. Next up, sometimes you have to get smaller to get stronger. And finally, block assumptions. I'd like to thank everyone who watched this live or on the replay, especially Alcam Art, for the great questions. As I always say, God bless, peace be well, keep the faith, and walk good. See you soon. And tomorrow night on April 19th, we have Ernest Owens from Philadelphia talking about the Starbucks Philadelphia incident. He was actually on 1 hour 2 days ago on NPR talking about it. So I've known Ernest for about 6 years. He's coming on tomorrow night to talk about the situation and give his take. Good night, everybody. Bye-bye.
Good night. Bye-bye.
What is up, everybody? It's Dr. Vibe here, host and producer of the award-winning The Dr. Vibe Show. I have hosted and produced over 2,000 epic conversations over the last 10 years. And what makes our conversations epic? We don't do interviews. We do conversations.